Late last year, we covered the launch of GMC's brand new Hummer EV. As the first vehicle to be equipped with GM's new Ultium technology battery architecture, and come to think of it, the first vehicle to wear a Hummer badge in more than a decade, it was clear that GMC needed to produce a vehicle that showcased both modern technology and appealed to existing Hummer fans. That October presentation featured performance front and centre, placing the 1,000 horsepower pickup truck squarely in the market as a capable off-roader that GMC wants us to call a super truck. With production of the Hummer EV pickup starting later this year and deliveries of the same expected to start at the beginning of next, GMC unveiled the latest member of the Hummer family over the weekend. It had previously teased shots of an upcoming SUV variant, and we've seen it lurking around in the backgrounds of various GMC presentations, so it wasn't a huge surprise to have the official reveal and opening of reservations of the Hummer SUV, timed to coincide with the NCAA Final Four tournament this weekend. And earlier today, we were invited to a press briefing where we got to learn more about the tweaks that differentiate the Hummer SUV from the Hummer EV pickup. Because it turns out that the two vehicles don't just differ in shape. Their specs and performance are similar, but there is enough difference because of a change in size between the two vehicles means that both have slightly different capabilities. So today, we're going to look at where they are the same and look at where they're not. Obviously, both vehicles make use of the new Ultium battery pack with its current iteration of NCMA chemistry. The choice to use that chemistry reduces cobalt requirements by 70% from earlier generation GM batteries. And as with the pickup, the pack forms a structural element for the chassis, with the double-stacked batteries positioned between protective shear panels above and below, adding rigidity to the vehicle. But after that, things do start to get a little different. You see, the SUV Hummer is 20 inches shorter than the Hummer EV pickup, which means that there's less space for batteries. To keep the pack capabilities the same between the two vehicles would basically mean raising the load bay floor or losing space up front. General Motors' engineering team discussed that choice and decided that the flat load bay was more important. So the SUV ends up with either 16 or 20 rather than 24 modules in the battery pack, depending on which capacity pack you choose. In the 20 module option, which covers all of the vehicles in the range with the exception of the entry-level model, the two layers of 10 modules each still allow the vehicle to deliver 11,000 foot-pounds of torque. But rather than the 1,000 horsepower of its slightly larger brother, the SUV variant produces 830 horsepower, which should still be more than enough to bring your weekly groceries home and then get you out and back to the outback, I think. Similarly, in all but the base model of the SUV, the pack switches mechanically from parallel to series operation when charging on an 800-volt CCS charger. This allows both the pickup and the SUV to charge from newer, faster chargers as well as legacy 400-volt CCS equipment. But in another nod to that space and capacity compromise, the SUV charges at 300 kilowatts rather than the 350 kilowatts of the larger packed pickup. To give you an idea of how that affects charging times, GMC claimed around 12 minutes to add 100 miles, 160 kilometers of range to the SUV, compared to just under 10 minutes for the pickup. And that drop of 150 horsepower means that the stoplight sprint takes around half a second longer. Oh dear. With the 0 to 60 or 100 kph clocking in at a still very respectable and pretty terrifying 3.5 seconds, at least in the top spec model. GMC hasn't yet given us performance specifications for the 2-motor 16-module and 2-motor 20-module base variants, but expect them to be slower again, given that they only produce a relatively restrained 625 horsepower. I never thought I'd be calling that restrained. And of course, all of these figures are still based on computer modelling and pre-production vehicles. I am expecting a little finessing to happen on the way to market, and the larger capacity variants are expected to manage over 300 miles on a charge, so expect the base model to be hanging at the 250-mile range mark. As you'd expect, the Mark features things like customizable suspension, steering and acceleration, as well as the Ultra Vision underbody cameras, Super Cruise, and the ridiculously named Watts to Power, which is a multi-sensory approach on the launch control seen in other performance EVs. They all carry over, unfortunately, from the Hummer pickup. Yeah, this is pretty bonkers. So far, so predictable. The SUV at first might appear to be a slightly less capable, but perhaps somewhat more daily living suited vehicle than the pickup. But there are some areas in which the SUV variant definitely beats out its bigger brother. The Hummer EV pickup is required by the pickup bed to have a pretty large overhang at the rear. This means that it has a departure angle of just 38 degrees, which is pretty much the same as the original Hummer H1, although still somewhat better than the prototype Tesla Cybertruck's 28 degrees. With its shorter rear end, though, the SUV variant manages to push that departure angle to a more respectable 49 degrees. That's markedly better than most of the current competition, including the upcoming R1S, and pretty close, frankly, to Unimog territory, with both Hummer variants sharing a breakover angle in excess of 30 degrees in extract mode, and the SUV also keeping 16 inches of ground clearance. These should be pretty competent as off-roaders, if pretty large. And should you want to really push the envelope on where you take your Hummer EV SUV, those four-wheel steering features, making use of something called a crab walk, should mean that you'll really be able to get your Hummer into that compact-sized parking space when you're picking up groceries at Safeway. With nearly 82 cubic feet of luggage space, that's about 2,500 litres, you'll also be able to get all your groceries in. And with the power rear door, you don't even have to worry about putting down your shopping on the wet tarmac to get access to the rear. More seriously though, for such a large vehicle, the Hummer manages a turning circle of 35.4 feet. That's 10.8 metres, but only if you use the four-wheel steering options, which are of course limited to low-speed operation. So you should be able to get through tighter, more challenging spaces when off-roading. And I guess probably more thoroughly stuck too, depending on how competent you are as an off-roader. Although GMC is keen to point out that the multitude of driver assistance options available to help the more novice driver back out of those same situations should be pretty good. Theoretically, though, it's a vehicle that really should live up to expectations for go-anywhere ability, assuming it performs, in practice, the way the spec sheet reads. And as with the reveal of the pickup variant, GMC has really leaned heavily into the go-anywhere oral American assumption that is built into the Hummer brand. Giving more information on the trail mapping facilities hinting at in the reveal of the pickup variant today, we saw a feature based on satellite mapping of off-road trails. This gives Hummer drivers access to accurately mapped trails with predictive energy use calculations baked in. The community-based energy mapping will allow you to see your predicted energy remaining at the end of a trailhead, making sure you have enough juice to drive home on the freeway. Route plans downloaded on your phone can also be transferred and displayed on the truck's infotainment screen, which, just like the pickup truck, uses the Unreal gaming engine to generate its graphics. Yes, it's overkill. And those route plans integrate charging locations too, so if you're further out into the boonies, you don't have to separately map your route to and from the trailhead in order to be safe. So by now, regular viewers will want the answer to the question that we hope is all in your mind. Will GMC, just like Rivian and Stellantis, put charging at trailheads? Will they work with Electrify America, maybe ChargePoint, or maybe build their own, or maybe some other suppliers to make sure that there are 800-volt, high-power DC rapid charging stations conveniently located in the places they're avidly encouraging drivers to go, all powered by renewable energy, of course. Places that are far from regular charging networks, which do tend towards the urban and suburban parts of the US. Well, I asked. And having bizarrely claimed that there were fewer EVs in the US than there are chargers, a statistic which makes literally no sense, Hummer's team went on to hedge their comments a lot, but it appears that the answer is, at least for the moment, no. While the electric vehicle team at GMC, like those at a lot of other car companies, seem aware that the build-out of charging infrastructure is a significant factor in the uptake of electric vehicles, it also seems to have pretty minimal interest in improving that situation. To be fair to GMC, given the range available from the Hummer EV, it's unlikely that in most situations you'd need trailhead charging, but given the go-anywhere chops that the company wants to demonstrate, it is disappointing. And it does mean that some places will be out of reach. But one feature that is worth mentioning, and got us quite excited while we're thinking about being out in the wild, is the ability of the Hummer SUV to power either equipment or to charge another vehicle. There's an optional power station generator, which means that the Hummer EV SUV can charge another vehicle at 6 kilowatts or power what GMC calls a variety of equipment and accessories at 3 kilowatts. This generally has the potential to make roughing it in the bush somewhat less rough. And it could be handy if your EV driving friend has miscalculated their distance to the nearest charging station. But this also hints at being able to provide power to your home in an emergency, and you know how all of us here are big fans of two-way power transfer. One thing we know that GM as a whole has been criticised a lot for in the past, particularly in our comments section, is quality. And one thing that the Hummer team talked about a great deal today was how they've changed their testing regime to be much more rigorous and challenging. This seems appropriate for a Hummer, but whether or not this will actually be reflected in the final vehicle is something I couldn't possibly comment on right now. For the moment at least though, it does look like the Hummer EV SUV will be another solid addition to the super expensive high-end EV market, with excellent off-roading features and some serious performance. But with a base price of $80,000, which is nearly $10,000 higher than the Rivian R1S and nearly double that of the base model Cybertruck, well, only time will tell if it'll sell. That's it for today. As always, thanks to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month Patreon supporters. Special thanks to our $50 a month Patreons, that's Regine Fellows, Gordon C., Paul Conway, Laura Sandborn, Anthony Coates, Denny Hyde, Sean Ueda, and Tazla in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters. They are John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Graylin, and Ian. If you would like to join the ranks of wonderful supporters, who wouldn't, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin, and Ko-fi. You can chat with the team and TE fans over at Discord, and if you'd like to buy some TE swag, just point yourself to our Redbubble store. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!